Hey everyone, it's me HawkeyeG and I'm here with another video for you. Today's topic, grudges. In particular, we're talking about the issue that people have been facing with grudge severity getting out of hand pretty quickly. I've been seeing a lot of posts online on the forums about how people think that the grudge system might be bugged or not working correctly, and how they're having a tough time dealing with the high severity level that you can reach with your grudges. So first, we're going to talk a little bit more about the grudge system itself and how it's working currently in Warhammer 3. Then we're going to talk about each of these penalties individually and break down how they affect you and what you can do to overcome them or do things in your campaign to compensate for those issues so that they don't cause you as many problems in the current state of the game. So with that explanation out of the way, let's get started. Now the first thing to talk about and specify is grudges. If you're a Dwarf player, you're probably familiar with how it works, but basically there's two types of grudges. You start with several of them at the beginning of your campaign. These are your more significant long-term objectives, and you can also get a grudge developed whenever something happens to you. If an AI takes your settlement, or if they raid your territory, or fight you in battle, you might get a grudge to reclaim that settlement, or raid your opponent's territory, or defeat that lord in battle. So those are the kinds of things that you can expect. Now, the problem that I think right now most people are facing is these long-term grudges. In either game, these grudges start at a severity of 10. We can see that here. Then it has an age modifier leading to a total severity of 20. Now, today I went back and played a campaign of Total War Warhammer 2. I played it out to about turn 20, and there was still no age modifier on the grudge. All of these starting grudges were at 10 severity on turn 20. Yet you can see here in this campaign, we're on turn 10, and I believe it was on this turn that these grudges escalated from 15 to 20. So it appears in Warhammer 3, every 5 turns, your long-term grudges have their severity increased. That's what ticks up the age modifier. So turn 5, turn 10, etc. That's what increases your severity. Now, I might have that number a little bit off from my brief little bit of testing. That seems to be the case. Regardless, you can see we're on turn 10 and we're at maximum severity level. That means we're losing control, research rate, and diplomatic relations with dwarves. We do get a little bit of a charge bonus, but of course we're playing dwarves. That's not really what we're looking for. That's not that useful. We do get a chance for slayers to be in regiments of renowns that we can summon, and this is kind of cool. It's kind of useful, but it's pretty niche as well. Again, we'd probably rather have the research rate and diplomacy and control than have the possibility to renown recruit slayers instantly into our army. So that is what seems to be the current issue with the grudges, the state of how they function, and what you're going to experience in your campaigns and what you should expect to experience. With that being said, I'm going to move into a different campaign, and we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the ways that you can deal with or overcome the penalties that these kinds of grudges will instill. So having explained the grudge system and how it works currently, we're going to talk about these penalties and how to overcome them. We're going to start with the control penalty, and forgive me if I slip up and call it public order. It's definitely going to happen. Now, -3 control isn't really that bad. Taxing a province is going to cost you more control. Playing on very hard campaign or legendary campaign, the difficulty modifiers for that are going to be more difficult. Of course, this is a normal difficulty campaign that I played through once to get a feel for things, but the tips I'm giving here are going to work the same even on a legendary difficulty campaign. And the problem really isn't this -3 control on its own, but the fact that they stack together. Now, one solution, which I think is the more obvious one, is the Dwarf Kegs building hostelry. If we look here, we can see that even if you built it in a minor settlement at tier 3, this +8 control will offset both the grudge severity penalty and your taxing penalty. So you would be making +1 control at the end of that. Really good way to offset it. It's functional in any settlement, so you can put it in a minor settlement if you don't feel you have room for it in your main settlement, and it will still function effectively. Even at tier 2, it's going to nullify the tax penalty and give you a little bit more public order back from that grudge penalty. So it's really useful to have. Maybe when you're taking a new province like this, in the very first settlement you take, you might be, if it's a safer settlement and it's further back, you might be able to spare this public order building a little earlier on. The next example I want to point out is through research. We have an option right here at the start of the research tree to immediately gain 1 control to all provinces. You can get this as soon as you start the game, it just takes 3 turns, or you can get it even a little later without having to dig too deep. If we do dig a little deeper, we can see that we have another research here for control and diplomatic relations bonus, and that one has a follow-up which has an additional bonus to that. So you can see through this research tree, not only can we get the control penalty dealt with, but we can also get the diplomatic relations penalty dealt with at the same time. So this is a really powerful option. You can see I don't have it here because I never felt like I needed it in this campaign for some other reasons we'll talk about as well, partly from being on normal and not having that penalty to public order, but the diplomacy we'll get to next. But the point being, if you want this, you can get it relatively early in the game and without too much trouble, and it'll solve a lot of those problems. The last set of options to talk about is, anything related to your lords or buildings, right? We have unique items, unique skill trees, landmark buildings, stuff like that. If we look at Dwarf Grudgebearer here, we can see that one of his unique items gives you +3 control all provinces. As soon as you get this item, you've resolved that public order penalty from grudge severity faction-wide. It's no longer an issue. He also has a unique skill that gives him +3 control to the local province, so while this won't be faction-wide, it will still nullify that penalty for whatever province you happen to be in. And if we look at his item set bonus, having all of his unique items gives you +1 control to all provinces. It's not very strong, especially for having to get 4 different pieces for it, but 1 point of control is still worth 1 point of control, so it has a little value there. And in Karazakarak, we have this landmark building for Throne Hall of the High King, which gives you a +2 control faction-wide. I know that this won't apply to every campaign the same way, but these are examples of the things you should look for no matter which faction you're playing as. Again, unique items, your unique items set bonus, unique skills on the Lord, or landmark buildings that might be present in some of your provinces. Those are going to be good ways to offset these global public order penalties that you get for maximum grudge severity. I haven't had the chance to play all the dwarf factions yet, so I can't tell you what all of those options would be for each individual faction off the top of my head, but hopefully that gives you a better idea of what to look for. The next piece to talk about then is the diplomacy penalty with dwarves. Now, I've touched on it before, but I think this is the least problematic one, largely because any dwarfs that exist are going to kind of want to be your friends by default. They're going to be fighting the same people as you, whether it's Skaven or Greenskins. The different factions nearby are going to have the same foes as you, and therefore are going to get bonuses from that. You're also going to be a natural trade partner for them, in part because you're going to want to develop your trade resources, because it's extremely powerful to do so as the dwarves. But having more trade resources makes you a better trade partner, and again, they're going to be surrounded by lots of enemies, so they're going to have no better options than to trade with you or maybe some Empire factions, even if your diplomacy with them isn't great, so that trade deal itself will help offset the penalty. And furthermore, we do have that research that I mentioned earlier. Again, if you're finding yourself struggling to get successful diplomacy going with dwarves, just focus on getting this piece of research, and that'll solve that problem for you as well. Now, of course, we've talked about control and diplomacy penalties, but one of the solutions I presented for both is through research, and we of course still have a research rate penalty to discuss, and if we're relying on research to solve the other 2 problems, that means the research penalty is pretty much the most important one for us to deal with. However, we do have a decent variety of ways to deal with this and to offset that penalty pretty easily, so we're going to go through those here. The first is going to be through the use of ancillaries that you get in your campaign. You can see here, I have a pretty decent list of students. It says you get these by ranking up while not researching a technology. Pretty easy to do, and it gives you 10% research rate. Getting 2 of these completely negates that penalty that you're getting. There's also a separate ancillary called the Archivist, which has the same acquisition requirements and gives the same bonus. So in theory, you could have a single character with 1 archivist, 1 student, and now you've completely overridden that negative 20% research rate penalty. So problem solved right there. One small tip for this is to always move your army and do your battles at the start of your turn. Select research at the end of a turn, because if you're not thinking about it actively, this will still give you the best opportunities to acquire students and archivists. You could see the list that I have there isn't too long for turn 100 because I've made no effort to min-max it. However, because I've only used that method of attacking at the start of my turns and doing research at the end. However, you can turn research off. You can go into your menu, disable research, and then play out your turn. So even on turns where you have a research going for something, you could still disable it and use that as a way to get additional students and archivists in the early game if you feel that you need them. You could even get well above 100% research rate and do more than just nullify this research penalty by getting additional students into your armies. So I think that's the best way to take care of it. But we do have some other methods available to us. There's also heroes, which we can use to boost research. Having the trait Ancestral Blood Grungni gives you a 5% increase to your research rate. And funnily enough, for every hero option I have right now, I could get a Grungni hero. So that right there is 15% research rate. Now, if you're in the early game, you might not have full access to this, but keep in mind, a tier 3 barracks, while it doesn't increase your capacity for Thanes, it allows you to recruit one, and you start with a cap of 1. The tier 3 smithy building actually does give you +1 hero capacity for runesmiths, so you could get 2 runesmiths just by having this building at tier 3. And even at tier 3 for the engineer guilds hall, you can recruit the engineer even though it doesn't give you the capacity, again because we start with a cap of 1. So even in your very first province, once you get things to tier 3, you're inevitably going to want a tier 3 barracks. It's got good units in it. You may or may not want a smithy right away, but you can at least build it to get the ability to unlock runesmiths, and the same thing is true of the engineers guild hall. You might not want to keep this at tier 3, but you can build it, recruit the hero, and then demolish it in order to get the trait. Of course, in this particular campaign, we do actually start with a master engineer, so that might not work out for you in this specific campaign, but just as a general rule, these are options that you would have, and so you can use that. We could see even with those buildings alone, we could hit that 20% research rate and offset the penalty with that, not including students, right? So we have the ability to stack different effects together to a pretty significant degree. There is also the research rate bonus for the Engineers Guild Hall, but I wouldn't really rely on this too much because, of course, you know, it's not going to pay off that much until you get your settlement to tier 5 and can get this building to tier 5. That's going to be expensive. So it's a nice thing to have, but that's not really an effective strategy for dealing with this research penalty when it's going to be the most relevant. But I do have one other option, which I think is still fairly relevant, and that is the final skill in the blue skill tree for your lords. In Game 2, this only gave you 10% research rate. In Game 3, this skill is incredible. It also gives you upkeep reduction, it gives you some recruit rank, and it gives you some good bonuses to protecting yourself against enemy hero actions. So increased chance of wounding them and reduced chance of success in general. I also highly recommend this blue skill tree line in general for the dwarves, in part because you don't have any casualty replenishment heroes. So while 6% casualty replenishment rate is not a lot, it's gonna be a difference maker in your campaigns. Having this on your lord helps a lot. If you're fighting Skaven, getting alert to prevent ambush on attack by Skaven helps. The attrition trait in this game got a buff, so you get a lot more attrition reduction at higher levels of it. And even at the start, the rework to the wall breaker trait means you can do increased attrition, and having the underway intercept chance is really great for fighting other underway factions like the Greenskins and the Skaven. Being able to intercept their attack that's going to bypass your front lines, or being able to catch them when they try to escape with a weak army, both of those are really useful. And ultimately, those are going to lead to this bonus for research rate. Again, this isn't going to be your tool in the immediate early stages of the campaign, but it's something worth working towards to build up. And the other part that's interesting to note is, of course, as we progress through the campaign and we stack more and more of these bonuses on top of one another, we can kind of make up for lost time, right? You're probably going to have some period of time where you're at that 20% research rate penalty, and you might not have enough students and archivists to cover for yourself yet to offset those penalties. But once we get through that stage, we can continue to build on our research rate with these tools that I've talked about here and really just catch up, right? 400% research rate, that's a lot better than 80% research rate. And it means that we will easily make up lost time for however much research rate we lost from that initial penalty. So with that being said, I think that covers everything that I wanted to for this video. We talked about how grudges work in Total War Warhammer 3, and we talked about the different penalties you get for high severity levels of grudges, and we also talked about the solutions to those penalties that you get for high severity levels of grudges. Whether or not it's a bug, I think is kind of up in the air. You know, it's working at a pretty clearly measurable pace. Like it's every 5 turns that severity increases for those old grudges. It's different from the previous game. Does that mean it's a bug, or does that mean it's an intended game design? I don't know. I don't work at Creative Assembly, but I do know that we have some solutions available to us that we can use effectively in our campaigns to make them smoother and easier to manage until we can eliminate those grudges successfully. Now, of course, if you did enjoy this video, please remember to like and subscribe. I'm going to be continuing to work on guides mostly focused around the dwarves at the start here, but I of course have other races that I want to expand into, like the Empire, the Lizardmen, and the Skaven. I'm really enjoying Immortal Empires, and we have a lot of content to work with and a lot of ground to cover here, but I'm trying to focus on dwarves and get a little bit more mastery of them first so I can talk about them and play them at a competent level here. With that being said, I do hope that these tips help you and give you an easier time managing your campaigns, especially in the early stages where these kinds of things can be the most challenging and most stressful. If you have any further questions on how to manage this system, or maybe how the grudge systems work, or any other questions related to dwarves, feel free to leave them in the comments section. And of course, if you have tips and tricks of your own for dealing with these penalties or strategies on how to approach your campaigns to overcome it, please feel free to leave those in the comments section as well. That's for everybody's benefit, and I do appreciate it. So with nothing more to say, thanks everyone for watching, have a great day, and we'll see you on the next one.